Welcome back. Sorry I haven't posted for a while. I was sick for a little bit and then traveled back from the US to Africa.
That sounds like excuses to me.
Anyway, I'm super excited to be going from this temperature and climate to this one. Last year I made a video about professional athletes who have had crazy long careers. In this video, I'd like to discuss a different type of longevity and look at the varying lifespan expectancy of athletes in different professional sports. Now, I'll be the first to admit that I'm looking at a lot of correlation and speculation on this. I don't have definitive data about this stuff, but I do think it can make a lot of sense. And also, if I'm presenting it with a lot of confidence, no one's going to know the difference of how good the data is.
Nobody's going to know. They're going to know.
Back when I was in high school, I had a friend whose dad was a physicist. And I remember he'd always talk to us about motorcycles, trying to discourage us from driving them, saying if you get in an accident, the physics just aren't there. So he obviously had the know-how and experience on that. And I don't think you need to have a PhD to understand some of these things and make some of these conclusions with some of these sports. One other thing to keep in mind, I'll admit, I'm not sure some of this, if it's correlation or causation. You look at bigger bodied guys, they typically don't live as long as smaller people. And a lot of times they're drawn to sports that like rugby, football, wrestling, strongman, those sort of things are more appealing to them. And so you might look at that and say, well, is it because they were big guys that they died or because this is a dangerous sport? So there's lots of different ways to look at this. Okay, so after doing extensive research, also known as just surfing the web for a long time, I was able to verify certain activities or sports that have a lower life expectancy that might be considered more dangerous. Now, obviously, we're not going to count things like base jumping or people doing parkour on skyscrapers or doing wingsuits, crazy stunts, things like that. But not the extreme stuff, but just traditional sports. So let's start with the first one. And to no surprise, the one that came back highest risk was boxing. Now, this shouldn't be much of a surprise because this is a sport where essentially you're assaulting your opponent to see whoever can inflict the most damage on their body first to win. So it's pretty brutal when you look at the potential for head trauma when it comes to professional boxer over all those years. Now, another risky sport would be MMA. They take some brutal hits and kicks. However, I wouldn't think it's as risky as boxing because they've got submissions, grappling, lots of different options there, instead of two guys just punching each other in the head for 12 rounds. So still a dangerous sport, but I'd put that below boxing. All right, another area of sport that came back pretty high was contact sports. So things like football and rugby. You can get a lot of injuries and damage that way, especially when you look at football with all the repetitive head injuries, concussions. Look at the olden days and how many NFL players are really messed up because of that now. So it makes you grateful they have concussion protocol in effect these days, as much as you hate making players sit out, but better safe than sorry. Okay, another sport that I didn't think about at first, but it's a very obvious one, and it's probably one of the most dangerous, would be professional wrestling. Now, I know professional wrestlers get a lot of flack because everyone thinks it's fake and it's scripted, but these athletes frequently have to wrestle with injuries. There's the potential for performance-enhancing drug abuse, not only for their performance and their recovery, but also to maintain a certain appearance. This sport really has a party culture with it, and there's frequent recreational drug use with it. And then the other thing to keep in mind, there is no off-season for wrestling. It's not like football or basketball, those other sports where you take some time off, but it's around the clock all the time, traveling and wrestling. So these guys, whether you like the sport or not, it is brutal and it's rough on your body. So many great wrestlers, you see them die at an early age. There are some rare examples of outliers out there that are still going somehow at an old age, but by the most part, though, it's a very dangerous sport. Another sport that I had forgotten about that kind of jumped out at me as I was looking at these early deaths was the sport of professional bodybuilding. This is not a violent or a contact sport, but you'd have to be blind to not see all these great stars dying at an early age. So in this sport, these elite athletes are using all types of performance-enhancing drugs, steroids, growth hormone. They're on all types of pharmacology, manipulating hormones, carrying a lot of extra body weight, and it's just not a healthy thing overall. So you'll see a lot of great bodybuilders dying at an early age, which is a sad thing. Speaking of carrying extra weight, I saw that Japanese sumo wrestlers typically die at least 10 years earlier than their male counterparts there in Japan, just from carrying all that extra weight on their body. Okay, then speaking of some of these other traditional sports like baseball, basketball, cycling, swimming, soccer, running, all those sort of things, I didn't see any negative correlation there. But one thing that did surprise me was the healthiest sports, according to the different studies I saw. And it's basically said the healthiest sports to keep you live longer are racket sports. So this would include tennis, racquetball, badminton, pickleball, table tennis, all those sort of things. And that surprised me. I first thought maybe that's because people do that when they're older for their hand-eye coordination. Trying to figure out the reason for that, because it's not, there are some sports and activities that are actually more thorough and complete exercise than that. So it's not like the ultimate. But another part of that would be the socialization. You can't do racket sports by yourself. And so usually that has some other components having to do with longevity with it. So obviously there's many different factors that will affect your life expectancy, aside just from the sports you enjoy doing. But the biggest one's probably going to be genetics. Then there's going to be what type of money or resources you have for your medical care to take care of your body. There's going to be your lifestyle habits that you've got and the environment you live in. So when we look at these supposedly dangerous sports or activities, it's easy just to jump to conclusions. We don't want to do that. But at the same time, you can't also just turn a blind eye to some of these obvious correlations. So whatever you do for sports, exercise, or recreation, I would just encourage you to find something you love doing and take good care of yourself. You want to be able to be active in doing those things in your later years, and you want to avoid extremes. Join me next week for another video. I promise it'll be better than this one.